You're soon going to see the faces of Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks and of my friend Helene Cooper of the New York Times. And I want to welcome them both here for the next hour. Helene is going to have an interview with Kathleen. I'd ask them both to activate their video. There's Helene, and I'm sure Kath is going to come up on the screen in just a minute. Let me say a word about Kath Hicks. Kath Hicks is universally admired in Washington, universally recognized as one of our finest experts on American defense, given her long experience in the Pentagon, given her service as the Henry A. Kissinger Chair at CSIS in Washington. She's a reformer. She's someone with deep knowledge, and we're very happy to have her here today. And Helene, we're very happy to have you here today. Helene Cooper has had a magnificent career with the New York Times. She and I first got to know each other when she was diplomatic correspondent of the Times when I was Undersecretary of State. She went on from there to be White House correspondent and now has been a Pentagon correspondent, has won many awards for her journalism, someone I deeply respect. And so, Helene, I'm going to turn this over to you for your on-the-record conversation with Kath Hicks. And it's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Nick. And I can't see Kath. Is she here yet? I don't see her yet on my screen.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Kath, welcome.
Okay. I was worried that Nick and I were going to have to talk to ourselves.
You can do that. That's okay with me. I'll listen intently.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Kath. I am hoping that since you agreed to do this Q&A with me, that you've forgiven me for my ginormous blunder a few years ago with CSIS when I was supposed to talk to Admiral Mullen, and I forgot that I was traveling with Mattis at the time. And you were really cool about it. So, but I'm really sorry again. Before we jump to Afghanistan, which is, as you can imagine, where one of the main things I'd like to talk to you about, I wanted to just start off with a more general question about your relationship with Lloyd Austin, and something that can give us some insight into how the two of you are running the building. You're both historic figures at the Pentagon. Is the division of labor along the same lines as past defense secretaries, where the deputy runs the day-to-day business of the building, or are the two of you approaching your jobs completely differently?
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you to Nick for the kind introduction, and to the Aspen Strategy Group, and to Helene for interviewing me. I do remember, but it was all very strategic, Helene, because it's going to pay off today because you owe me one big.
I do.
Let me just say, I did come with prepared remarks. I can give those remarks at the beginning, or we can jump right into the Q&A. I just want to pause and see what your preference is.
I think you should start with your prepared remarks. I forgot about that.
No problem. And I'm happy to pick up on the great question.
And then we'll come back to the question.
Fantastic. All right. Well, in any case, it's great to be with all of you this morning, though admittedly, as much as I do love the Pentagon, as you can tell from my repeated stints here, seeing you all in person in Aspen would be far preferable to sitting here virtually as we all are on Zoom. So I was asked to share some thoughts with you today about the Department of Defense's initial priorities. I'm going to focus those comments on competition with China and highlight what the department is doing already to meet this challenge, especially in regard to innovation and modernization. This is an issue I've worked on substantially over the years, and as a recovering defense strategist and the Secretary of Defense's COO, to the question Helene was going to ask me, it is at the core of my priorities as Deputy Secretary of Defense. As Secretary Austin made clear early in his tenure, mission one for the US military is to defend the nation. Understanding why we are modernizing and what we are modernizing for begins with an appreciation for the challenges that imperil that mission. We have never had the luxury of being faced with only one threat, and today is no different. From COVID-19 to climate change, from Russia to Iran and North Korea, from advanced technology and weapons proliferation to creeping authoritarianism and violent extremism in its many forms. Our nation and our military must constantly be assessing risk across time and space. It is clear, however, that the comprehensive challenge posed by the PRC sets the pace for most defense requirements. From the President's interim national security strategic guidance to Secretary Austin's message to the force, our administration has been clear-eyed. Beijing has the economic, military, and technological capability to challenge the international system and American interests within it. This is happening all along the continuum of conflict, from routine statecraft through the use of sharp power or gray zone tactics, to the potential for sustained combat operations and an expanded and capable nuclear enterprise. As an example, Beijing continues to leverage its maritime militia to press its unlawful maritime claims in the South China Sea. The PRC's military capabilities are rapidly advancing in a number of areas. The PLA continues to make progress, strengthening its ability to conduct joint operations, build readiness, and field increasingly sophisticated conventional forces, such as long-range conventional missiles and integrated air defense systems. The PRC is also advancing its space and cyber capabilities. As recently heard from the Office of the DNI, China presents a prolific and effective cyber espionage threat and possesses substantial cyber attack capabilities. President Biden has stated that while there is going to be extreme competition between the United States and China, we do not need to have conflict. In advancing American interests, we anticipate the US military will often serve as a supporting player to diplomatic, economic, and other tools. Central to the military's value is demonstrating the will and capability to credibly deter PRC aggression. This will best position us to avoid a conflict. In extremis, where our vital interests are threatened, we will ensure the US ability to fight and win. In the Biden administration's first 100 days, the Department of Defense is moving out to transform the rhetoric of competition into reality. We are committed to leveraging the greatest strategic asset we have in deterring China, our network of partners and allies. For the US military, our defense relationships strengthen interoperability. They generate common norms and respect for responsible international behavior across domains, and they deepen the agility of our collective global response. Success may depend on how we work with our friends to secure our common interests and common values. In a recent trip to the Indo-Pacific with Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin highlighted a number of the collective issues that the US-Japanese alliance faces. And he underscored that our alliance remains resolute and resilient because of our shared values and history of shared sacrifices. Additionally, Secretary Austin and I have moved quickly to overcome institutional inertia, which exists within any large organization. We have instilled disciplined processes and governance structures throughout the defense enterprise. Our FY fiscal year 22 budget will provide early insight into our strategic approach. The President's budget request reinforces the investments needed to compete effectively. It will support defense research, development, test, and evaluation funding. This will lead to breakthrough technologies that drive innovation and underpin the development of next-generation defense capabilities. Where the nation's security needs are no longer being met, the budget provides the resources to phase out systems and approaches optimized for an earlier era. It will set a sustainable shipbuilding plan to ensure our maritime capability outmatches any competitor. The request will modernize our nuclear deterrent and invest in long-range fires capabilities. And it will leverage the Pacific Deterrence Initiative and ensure that the United States builds the concepts, capabilities, and posture necessary to meet challenges posed by China. Our global posture review and national defense strategy efforts now underway will guide further changes. But even now, we are incenting innovation at the department to develop new operational concepts and capabilities. We are embarking on a campaign of learning marked by experimentation and rapid fielding. This will be focused around several key joint operational challenges vital to our success. There is no single point solution or enabler that sparks innovation. This means that we are making department-wide cross-cutting adjustments related to culture, people, systems, and process. We are actively thinking about the strategic levers available to incent innovation. For instance, DoD must look to bridge the valley of death, so-called, for the gap between the innovation or creation of a new platform and the ultimate acquisition of it by the department. We can do that through disciplined and coordinated joint experimentation. The department must leverage our unmatched test and lab infrastructure to spur both innovation and competition across the public and private sectors. And we need to be sure that DoD's vast ecosystem of innovative organizations is sufficiently integrated and optimized. This means being able to share best practices and key findings focused on the most important national security challenges. And the department must continue to aggressively take steps to be a data-centric organization. Data enables capabilities such as AI, machine learning, and various autonomous technologies. It is critical to warfighters seeking advantage on the battlefield, and it is critical to decision makers. More transparent and credible data shines a light on the department's use of force, for instance. In so doing, it will help us maintain our strategic focus rather than succumb to the death by 1,000 cuts of daily crises. To better leverage data, we will continue to implement the department's data strategy. We will give our data leaders a seat at the table and invest in our data talent. And we will develop enterprise analytic capabilities. Simultaneously, as we develop new concepts and capabilities, we must ensure that they are protected from our adversaries. To that end, the department is looking at different ways that we can work to shore up vulnerabilities in our supply chains. Even today, prime DoD contractors and mid and small size suppliers source components, including critical components like microelectronics, from our rivals. We also depend on adversarial sources for critical materials. Solving these problems takes a comprehensive government strategy, but there are a number of actions we can take at DoD. Those include reducing our dependency on adversarial sources and increasing the diversity of domestic suppliers. Relatedly, DoD is working with other departments in the US government that are members of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS. We are ensuring that the principles that guide CFIUS's decision-making continue to protect America's technological advantage. Namely, we should construct objective standards and presumptions that cannot be overcome unless mitigation efforts can resolve national security concerns. Doing this will increasingly preserve our capabilities. Additionally, we are working closely with Congress. A real, enduring, bipartisan consensus has emerged around the multidimensional challenge that Beijing presents, as Nick commented at the end of the last session. Democrats and Republicans alike recognize that the department must prioritize the PRC as the pacing challenge to the United States. This cooperation with Congress is critical to ensuring the department receives the support required to deter aggression. Let there be no doubt, China presents a real and enduring challenge to our department. Our own inertia, though, can be a significant barrier to meeting the moment. In highlighting some of the measures that we have taken in just the first 100 days of the Biden administration, I want to impress upon you the imperative Secretary Austin and I feel to adapt our strategy, capabilities, and forces for the future. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. Helene, I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kath. This was fascinating. And I really want to get into some of the China issues that you just mentioned, because that's such a big deal at the Pentagon. But let's jump first to Afghanistan.
Sure.
Because it is such a, it is very much the subject that is on the mind of everybody in the building, the ending of America's longest war. We've all heard about how President Biden came to his decision. We've heard a little bit about the over-the-horizon planning underway at the Pentagon for trying to keep the place from becoming another launch pad for terror attacks on the United States and our allies. But how concerned are you about a scenario like what we saw in Saigon in 1975 when the South Vietnamese government fell and we had helicopters evacuating Americans from rooftops? Do you anticipate that we will soon be seeing that in Kabul?
No, Helene, I don't. I want to stress both President Biden and Secretary Austin's emphasis on a safe, orderly, disciplined withdrawal process. And that is our focus. We will have the ability for self-defense for our forces that are there. And we will execute on that as needed. But I want to jump kind of to the premise of the question on the over the horizon and counterterrorism. You know, it's not 2001, it's 2021. And over the intervening 20 years, the United States has developed a wide range of tools that we didn't have. We have new structures. We have the National Counterterrorism Center. We have a Department of Homeland Security. We also have, of course, a wholly new a suite of capabilities from space to cyberspace to unmanned systems and other approaches. We have new CONOPs of operation. We have better collaboration between CIA, for example, and other actors, the IC in general, and our partners and allies. So there's just a completely different landscape in which we are operating. And as we do in almost every other part of the world, executing on our counterterrorism mission without having substantial forces on the ground is the general way in which we approach counterterrorism. So in Afghanistan, we have achieved the goals we went in for in 2001. We have demonstrated, we've removed al-Qaeda and demonstrated that we will not tolerate it being a safe haven for use against United States citizens and territory. And we will continue to hold those vital interests and hold the Taliban and any other actors inside Afghanistan responsible for living up to those expectations.
But is that over the horizon planning dependent on, I mean, I assume, are you factoring in the possible fall of Kabul?
I'm not going to get into operational details. I think it's fair to say we're thinking through all the contingency operations, but we are working on the military side alongside a political effort, a diplomacy-centered effort that's very much focused, not just from the United States, but around the region and around the world on ensuring that Afghanistan is able to protect, the most critical interests for the international community. If you're asking if we're prepared for how the United States can protect its own citizens and its forces, the answer is, of course, we do that planning and we are prepared to do so.
No, I'm not. I have no doubt that we will be able to evacuate the embassy in plenty of time. I think I'm more focused on just the ability of the ANSF to survive once the American forces are gone, and just just how much of your planning is assuming that the ANSF collapses and Kabul collapses. How much time do you think you have?
I think you're asking a wholly different set of questions that aren't, if you will, on point to the president's overall message. And the message is, we are protecting the vital interests of the American people by ensuring that Afghanistan cannot be a safe haven for terrorism. That will continue to be true for terrorism that is threatening to the United States at home. If, in terms of how the Afghan peace process moves forward and the way in which the Afghan government, if you will, manages through, we have been very clear in our support for a negotiated settlement and approach, but that is not central to how the United States plans for itself, both in terms of the over-horizon capability and any enduring interests we have inside Afghanistan as it relates to terrorism.
Okay. So tomorrow is May 1st. There's been a lot, and this is my last Afghanistan question before I want to move to China. There's been a lot of confusion about what happens in Afghanistan after tomorrow, particularly when it comes to the US providing air support to the ANSF. Does the US plan to continue to provide air support to the Afghan security forces after tomorrow if they come under attack from the Taliban while we are going through this? And I had never heard the whole phrase military retrograde operation before, but now I have some new Pentagon lingo I can fling around. But during the withdrawal, are we going to continue to provide air support to the ANSF if they come under attack from the Taliban?
So the United States, again, has an approach that is definitely protective of the orderly withdrawal of the US. We do have coalition partners, including the Afghans, that we will be working with as we go through that process. And so if your question is sort of a May 1 question, the answer is yes. The United States does have within its planning efforts that it will be working with a coalition partners. Those include NATO allies and, of course, the Afghans, and will be able to provide support as we withdraw, including, to your point, if they come under attack during that withdrawal.
Thank you. That's clear. There was a lot. I'm sure you saw sort of the confusion earlier this week on that. Okay, so let's move to China. China is expected to surpass the US as the world's biggest economy by 2028. And China is gaining on the US in military power, as I'm sure you know. Do you believe then that a military conflict with China is inevitable?
I don't believe it's inevitable. And I think a key aspect of the United States ensuring it does not become inevitable is demonstrating the credibility and will on the military side, where we sit at DoD, to thwart any such efforts that would violate, direct US interests. That, of course, will be only a piece of that overall national security approach that is diplomacy led. So there are lots of other areas in which the United States and China will contest the rules of the international road in the economic sphere and other spheres. And there are also opportunities for cooperation that hope to draw away from conflict. But in the military realm, I think what we can do is first ensure we understand escalation patterns and try to avoid unnecessary escalations, but at the same time, secondly, demonstrate that will and credibility to deter aggression that violates our interests.
Well, on the point then of escalation patterns, what is the biggest trigger? What do you worry? Do you worry more about Taiwan being the trigger, or do you worry more about South China Sea Islands, which I still remember Joe Dunford famously got angry at us because we overheard him talking to Harry Harris in the Pentagon saying, would you go to war over over the Spratly Islands? And we put that in the paper and he got mad. But on a serious note, should we be more worried about Taiwan being the trigger, or what concerns you more?
Yeah, I think that there's no a priori answer to that question, Helene, because it really depends on at any given point in time where the Chinese have in their own minds where they might try to press advantage. So that's why it's so critical that the United States be really clear about our interests, whether it's around Japan, whether it's around South China Sea, to your point, and or Taiwan or elsewhere. So I don't have an answer that is I worry about one or the other. We watch diligently daily all of these spaces. We think in time about China. We worry about China today and making sure we can signal correctly today. We worry about it 5 years down the road where there's shifts in capability and perhaps intent from the Chinese. We'll be watching that. And we worry about it on the 10 to 20-year trajectory where there, for example, nuclear weapons capability and other areas of growth start to shift the landscape to different kinds of military approaches from the US.
It's so weird listening to you here talk about this, because I remember when I first started on the Pentagon, it was in 2014. Chuck Hagel was SecDef then, and then Ash Carter. And we took fairly regular trips to China, defense secretary trips. They were always filled with tension, but we went, and there was far more engagement. And then we shifted to the Trump administration, and Mattis never went. Neither did Esper. Neither did, I've already forgotten the guy who was between the two of Shanahan. And then the sort of the high level engagement, SecDef to SecDef, occurred only on the outskirts of maybe the Shangri-La meeting where they'll snatch 30 minutes and talk. And we seem to be going down this trajectory. There's nothing planned now. I mean, how are you doing the sort of military to military engagement with China? Where do you see that? Do you want to restore it to a more traditional type of where they actually are talking in a real way, or are
Sure. Absolutely. The United States and China have every reason to be speaking to each other across a range of issues, inclusive inside that are military issues, cyber, et cetera, which start to bleed out of DoD into other areas. We absolutely in this administration and inside the Pentagon are looking forward to those engagements. It's not a one-way street. We don't make all those decisions, and those conversations with the Chinese are ongoing about how best to set up those engagements. I'll just add that's at the strategic level, even at the bridge to bridge level, if you will. That's vital in terms of de-escalation abilities. So our ability to talk, that you may recall the CUES agreement that the Navy came to with the PLAN, all of those sorts of channels of communication are vital to us understanding we're in competition. But again, as the president has said, competition does not necessarily equate to military conflict, and it's in the interests of both the United States and China to prevent that.
But there's nothing on the schedule from any high member of the Biden administration.
I will just, first of all, the president has reached, I'm trying to understand your question. The president has had a conversation with Xi. The Secretary of Defense is working through engagements with Chinese counterparts. We are trying to get that set up now. It's not because we're trying to prevent it, but again, please recognize that the Chinese have their own views about engagements with the US. And of course, you'll remember the Anchorage engagement that has already occurred as well. So we're lining up behind that. DoD doesn't need to be the first, should not be the first out of the gate. We've had the president, we've had the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, and we are working now on DoD.
Turning to Russia and Ukraine, I just have one question I'd like to ask on that. Moscow withdrew a few thousand troops from the Ukrainian border last week, but there's still thousands there. What do you make of Putin's maneuverings on the border? Do you think he's basically just trying to mess with Biden and send a message on, Defender Europe? We're going to do NATO exercises on his border. He can show us that he can mass troops. Or is he actually thinking about going in to do something about this North Crimean water issue?
I think the key from our perspective, of course, we're watching everything that happens day to day. As you say, there have been some withdrawals. We've been pleased to see those, but we are monitoring routinely, and we are not underestimating or trying to guess at the instincts or day-to-day desires that President Putin may have. So we're watching it very carefully. We've been very clear about our commitment overall to Ukraine's sovereignty and being able to protect itself. We're very hopeful that these signs that you're indicating show that there was an exercise underway, that the Russians may want to be signaling certain things beyond just their exercise, but that there is not actually a decision made to undertake any stepped up military action beyond what they already do in gray zone in eastern Ukraine.
Okay, we have only about 10 minutes left on questions. I'm trying to keep my eye on the clock at the same time. And I wanted to turn to more domestic issues in the building. But before I do that, I guess this is sort of in the building. I wanted to ask you about JEDI. A federal court ruled earlier this week that Amazon has a valid case to challenge the award to Microsoft. No thanks to Trump's meddling. Now this capability, which has already been on hold for 2 years, could be delayed again. Are you going to continue to delay moving on JEDI until this sorts itself out in court?
Well, as you might imagine, I can't comment on the court case, but I will, and I'm not going to comment on specifically what DoD is going to do, but I will say, as my comments indicated, it is absolutely vital that we are able to move forward on a data-centric approach in the department. We must have ourselves secure in cyberspace. The department weathered, for example, SolarWinds relatively well compared to other parts of the government, but that's just the latest wake-up call. We have every reason to think that we have adversaries who are trying to get into our systems every day. So for all those reasons, moving to a cloud architecture is going to be vital to how we innovate in this department. And we're going to have to assess where we are with regard to the ongoing litigation around JEDI and determine what the best path forward is for the department.
Okay. So back to my first question about you and Secretary Austin. How are you divvying up? What are you, I mean, how are you guys, are the two of you, I mean, the idea that we have a female deputy secretary is almost as exciting as the idea that we've got a Black defense secretary. Just how aware are you of sort of the groundbreaking role that you both are in right now? And is any of that affecting how you're approaching? This is a stupid question, but I'm trying to get at, is that affecting how you're approaching your job? How do the two of you view this opportunity that you both have right now? Is a big historic first step. Do you let that influence how you do your job?
Yeah, well, let me first say back to the question you asked before I started my remarks. It is a relatively traditional, I mean, it's always varied from one team to the next, but relatively traditional CEO, COO model. So let me answer on that piece. In executing on our responsibilities, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think about it's implicit, I think, probably in what I do, that I've grown up through a national security structure where women were wildly underrepresented. And that we have a lot of challenges still today inside the department, civilian workforce, and probably more prominent in the press military workforce challenges that relate to gender and of course relate to other aspects of diversity. So that's implicit in what I do. I don't do it from a conscious basis, if you will, in terms of being the first female deputy secretary. I certainly take that as a great honor, a privilege, and an incredible responsibility. But it's more around, that responsibility is more around being the deputy secretary at a time when and supporting a secretary who is historic in terms of his role, but also as at a time when the department's needs are so substantial and we are ready to reform this department.
Okay. Well, then on the issue, because there are two issues that the department came into office, and Secretary Austin, I think within 3 days of walking into the building, took on extremism and sexual assault. Let's start with sexual assault. Because I know that's something that you have focused on as well in your time there. Has the time come to take the handling of these sexual assault cases in the military out of the military chain of command?
Where we are right now, Helene, is we're looking at all potential solutions that move the needle. You know that the Independent Review Commission has come in with a viewpoint on that, which is to take it out of the chain of command. The secretary is reviewing that input, talking to, obviously, Senator Gillibrand has a bill as well. There's going to be other legislative viewpoints. And then we have a very deliberative process here inside the Pentagon where commander viewpoints and certainly the viewpoints of the leadership of the military departments will be important in informing the secretary's decision. So what I would say that I think you can count on is we believe accountability has to be part of the solution set. Prevention is incredibly important, but we're not leaving accountability off the table. We know that there's a lack of trust and faith in the institution to deliver. We can see that of course, in deep dive reviews like the Fort Hood report, and we can see it in our data in terms of what we hear back on sexual harassment and sexual assault. We are going to be solution oriented and deliberative. So if we think a solution can deliver on increasing trust and increasing accountability, and most importantly, decreasing incidents of sexual harassment and sexual assault, we will be interested in that solution.
Have you been surprised at the depth of the problem, though? I mean, in the last
no.
Yeah. Can you expand on that?
I'm a woman in the modern American workplace. I've worked in national security. I understand the challenges. I talk to victims. It's not surprising. It's disheartening. I think it's disheartening for everyone in the system. I think, if you talk to the military leadership, they would say the same thing. The question is, how do we move the needle? No one is satisfied with where we are.
But why we have been writing about this and calling the Pentagon out. The Pentagon has been grappling with this for years now. We've done year after year after year. We're doing the same stories over and over again. And every year, each new administration that comes and says, we're going to grapple, we're going to wrestle with this. Why is this so hard?
Well, that's a whole conversation. I think it's tied into a set of behaviors and cultures that are challenging. I mean, you mentioned, for example, extremism. We also have violence prevention challenges, even on self-violence. I mean, we have suicide rates going up. So there's a whole set of issues that make us have to wonder and understand leadership culture, prevention activities, and how we think about readiness of the force in a holistic sense. Sexual assault and sexual harassment are one major and important manifestation of that, but there are others. So I think the reason it's hard is back to those root cause problems. So we definitely are going to pay attention to sexual harassment and sexual assault, and we're going to pay attention to extremism, but we're also going to pay attention to suicide and mental health and other factors, if you will, that all seem to point to general challenges on leadership. We have amazing leaders in the Department of Defense, but this is clearly, these are signs and signals that that we have challenges we have got to deal with. And I think you have reached a point in time where, between the Fort Hood report and movement in terms of viewpoints on Capitol Hill and new leadership in the department, we're ready to take these challenges on, agnostic on the solution set that we arrive at, as long as it delivers.
Okay, on extremism then, you say you weren't surprised at the fact that the sexual assault issue was such a big deal, that continued the depth of it at the building, in the building, and at military bases around the world. What about, I remember on January 6th, covering the Capitol riots and watching, and there were many number of Marine flags out there. There were many number of military, how many military and former military enlistees and service members took part in the riot, and the riots. The Pentagon sort of has reacted in the number of generals and officers I've talked to about this. It's been very interesting looking at the reaction of them. We didn't realize that this was such a big problem. Is this something that we all sort of knew was there within the military? And how do you go forward from January 6th?
I think the first issue that is what I just talked about, which is thinking about that connectivity of leadership to the soldier, sailor, airman, marine, and space guardians that they're overseeing. On the civilian side, same thing. We oversee the total force, a very large civilian federal workforce, as well as contract workforce. And there's a real question, I think, about the degree to which we have, like the rest of society, sort of hived off things that, in terms of personal space, and social media being a very prominent example of this, where there are real implications that come to display on times like January 6th, other incidents, whether you're talking about extremism like we saw at Fort Hood, or at the Navy Yard, which is a different motivations. But similarly, point being, violence playing out in the workplace, or violence playing out inside society from our workforce. So not surprising in the sense that it's reflective of larger society. Very disturbing that it's a higher percent of that broader society. And we know that from the intelligence reporting that military and former military are highly desired recruits. They are being actively recruited into extremist, again, extremism being all kinds of types and flavors, but in approaches that go counter to the oath of office that we take as civilians and as military. So as I said before, we know the vast majority of people who get up every day, either put on the uniform or come in as civilians or contractors, are mission focused around supporting the United States of America. But we live within a society and with technological means in which, as we saw back with Al Qaeda all the way to today, where the flash to bang of radicalization is both difficult to detect and much quicker than it used to be. You know, Timothy McVeigh of the 1990s put into the system today, with social media as it is, you can imagine how much more difficult, if you looked, for instance, at terrorism overseas, how much more difficult that is to deal with. So it is a real concern for us. We're getting after it in insider threat programs that have already been underway. We're looking at things like security clearance reform approaches. We're thinking through our monitoring, just as the intelligence community does, monitoring of our unclassified systems, for example, to make sure they're not being misused for these purposes. And all the while, we're keeping right at the center, of course, the right of Americans to free speech, and the fact that this is not reinforcing time and again, this is not about politics. This is about supporting the oath of office people take and ensuring we're looking left and right at our teammates and making sure they're healthy, they're mentally healthy, and they're not succumbing to recruitment practices, whether it's from a foreign power, from a counterintelligence perspective, or it's from a radicalizing web page.
It's such, just listening to you talk about, it's such a hard issue, and it's clear because you have to balance the rights of free speech. You have to balance all of these things, but it just seems like it's going to be such a huge hill to climb. This is my last question before we move to Q&A, but we've got a primary, the Pentagon the American military still has a predominantly white general officer corps, particularly when we get to the top 4-star levels. Do you think this predominantly white cadre of white guys, and when I say white, I mean white and men, white and male, are actually going to, in a real way, look for ways to open up their ranks to more women and minorities and pay the attention they should to a Black Secretary of State and a female deputy?
Bottom line, I do. I think they have, in all the conversations we've had internally, I think they show incredible commitment to the challenge set. I think they see the challenge. I think having peers in their group, in addition to the Secretary and I, when you look at the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, for example, General Brown, African-American male, who spoke out very eloquently and early last summer around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in his own personal experiences. Those conversations are deeply meaningful, and they're meaningful at a personal level, whether you're the entry-level recruit or you're sitting at the top of the pyramid as a 4-star. And I think they have been very energized to make sure that we can tackle this extremism problem as well as this DEI challenge inside the services. And to your point, then you add in the president and vice president and the secretary and I, and I'm confident we will make progress here.
Well, we all wish you the best on this. It's going to be fascinating to cover. I'm so interested in what you and Secretary Austin are trying to do on these two really big issues. And, we wish you all the best of luck. I'm looking forward to writing lots and lots of stories about this. Nick, I will turn this over to you because I think you are handling the Q&A. Unless he's gone out for coffee. There you are.
Getting a coffee.
So that was a great conversation. Thank you very much. I am actually not handling the Q&A. That's going to be done by Neve King, who's going to participate, I think, arrive on the screen within one moment, and she'll get the questions to Kath. But Kath, thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your questions. Our first question today is coming from one of our new rising leaders, Elisa Sabinius, please.
Hi, I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News. Thank you so much for being with us today. I was fascinated by your remarks on China. One interesting thing in the first 100 days has been a series of hacks on US organizations that analysts have said may have roots in China. I'm curious about your thoughts on the biggest cyber threats coming from China and your strategy from a DoD perspective for handling them.
Sure. As I said earlier, I think, Elisa, that should assume, I think maybe is the safest way to put it, a good undergirding assumption for us is that we will be under pretty much constant attack from a variety of state and non-state actors in cyberspace in DoD. And China is the most capable of those. As the Russians have proven, they're not so bad either. I'm not trying to incite them to try harder here. But the Chinese have incredible long-term capability. So how do we think about that? Well, of course, we think about on the defense side, making sure our DoD networks are defended. And that has to do with all kinds of upgrading approaches and routine cultural shifts, often called cyber hygiene, that we should be undertaking, and we monitor that very carefully, and we have benchmarks that we're moving against to make sure we're improving there. One thing as the deputy secretary that I can do, other than setting the standards and holding people accountable, is helping to provide the resources for those capabilities, and so that's something that I'm very much focused on. Also on the and I just add into there, upgrading our systems overall as part of that storyline. On the beyond defensive side, we obviously also need to demonstrate that there are costs for cyber attacks, and President Biden has most recently demonstrated that, I think, with Russia in terms of his response to SolarWinds. And that's the kind, we need to continually hold cyber actors accountable when they are undertaking activity that threatens us. The last thing I'll say is the defense industrial base. I stated this in my opening remarks, but we have a lot of vulnerabilities in the industrial base, and cyber is one set of those. And that's a priority for the department, is trying to both be able to assess and understand those threats to our defense industrial base. I mentioned microelectronics, for example, as one area, and make sure we have strategies designed to protect those, whether that's about increasing and then diversifying US supplier bases, or other approaches that can help to protect us.
Thank you. Our next question is from Courtney Kube, the NBC Pentagon correspondent. Courtney? Okay, if we don't have Courtney there, we'll move on to Leslie Thomas, please. Leslie.
Hi, thank you very much. You framed President Biden's Afghanistan policy as focused on the prevention of the use of Afghanistan as a launchpad for attacks against the United States and United States citizens and interests. We don't want to be in endless wars. Nobody does, but we did look at, the Soviet withdrawal and the US disengagement a long time ago. And what happened there could obviously happen again and is on everybody's minds. In a world in which lots of us received notifications that 300 people are on a civil society assassination list last week, in which a woman was whipped in Herat last week, and these are activities that are or are not approved by the Taliban. Are there sticks as well as the carrots that Thomas Donilon referred to, 80% of a budget that we may or may not want to provide to a government that does these things? And how can those be used constructively?
So I think, Leslie, you've framed that up, I think, just right, and in particular in referencing Tom's comments, that there are mostly non-military approaches that make sense in 90% of the cases in the world where we are trying to shape the behavior of other countries. And when it comes to human rights, for instance, that's an area where we use a lot of different tools, whether it's economic sanctions, whether it's approaching, different statuses or tiers of status for countries with regard to privilege in the international community, whether it's government support and funding, as you alluded to. Those are all sticks, if you will, that the United States has at its advantage. Because the administration has prioritized U.S. global leadership and has manifested that by working closely with allies and partners, that gives us much more leverage with those tools than we would have if we were not, if we had chosen more of an America First approach that ignored the interests and values that our allies and partners bring to bear. So I just want to, because you brought it up a little bit in the context of women's rights, I just want to foot stomp that we care very deeply about the rights of women inside Afghanistan, inside Saudi Arabia, inside other parts of the world. But this is not about boots on the ground. This is about how the United States conducts foreign policy to advance its human rights interests using all the tools at its disposal.
Our next question is from Jane Harmon, the President Emerita of the Wilson Center. Jane, thank you.
I'm trying. Have you got me? Okay, here I am.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Excellent conversation. As you know, I spent 9 terms in Congress, and then I was a member for a decade of the Defense Policy Board before Madeleine Albright, Henry Kissinger, and I and a few others were removed a month before the Trump administration ended. My question is about your good goal of modernization and innovation in the military. It is a good goal. I strongly support it. However, it has a huge effect on Congress. And one of the things you said, the defense industrial base is vulnerable, no question, but it's also vulnerable to losing jobs. And what worries me is twofold. Number one, the people in those jobs are highly trained, rocket scientists and so forth. But number two, if you move to modernization, you're going to threaten a lot of the activities in various congressional districts and get a lot of blowback. So what is your strategy? One thing that I'll just add that worked in the 90s was dual use technologies, helping firms do more in the commercial sector so that they could keep people employed. How are you thinking about a management plan for Congress?
Yes, very, very good question. And you are absolutely right that this is at the heart of how, if we want to modernize and move forward, we have to do it in close cooperation with Congress. This is very much I would say, the DoD part of the Build Back Better message and theme, which is it's not simply that we're divesting. It's that we are developing a U.S. both manufacturing and STEM-oriented workforce work base for the systems and approaches we need in the future. We need systems and approaches in the future. We are not divesting to do nothing. We are divesting to shift. And so, as you point out, Jane, anything from transition assistance, where we've done that, for instance, for BRAC before. So when for those who don't follow that, when we close a base, we provide assistance in and around to the community for transitioning. And those have been incredibly popular, very successful in terms of taking areas where the community thought they really needed that installation in order to thrive and survive. And now they can use that with transition assistance, use that for commercial approaches. We can use those kinds of ideas. I'm not saying exactly the same as BRAC, those basic approaches of incentivizing transition to new capabilities and new technologies and new approaches. We absolutely need to protect our critical workforce skills. You can look at anything from shipyards and the aerospace engineers that we have, vital interest for us. And we talk a lot internally, at least with the secretary and I here, about having a sustainable approach. So moving away from focus on how many this or that platform we're building and more about how sustainable is that? Are we ensuring an enduring industrial base? Is there a workforce there for the kinds of capabilities we need in the future? So those are the sorts of initiatives, exactly as you described, that we are trying to make sure we have in place, particularly as we move to looking at the FY23 cycle, which is the year essentially that we are approaching in terms of our planning. This will be centerpiece to how we think about some of the changes we may need to see.
Thank you. And our last question today is coming from Patrick Tucker, who's Defense One's technology editor. Thanks.
Hi, I'm not sure how to, let's see, there we go. Hey, Dr. Hicks, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So there are reports that indicate over the most recent budget, there was some disagreement between the Pentagon and the White House. And so I wonder if you can characterize that discussion a little bit, but moreover, when you look across the broad spectrum of Pentagon spending right now, from nuclear weapons modernization and modernization priorities across all the services, where can the Pentagon realistically make cuts while also meeting all of these big modernization priorities? Thanks.
Sure. So I would not characterize it that way. I would say that the characterization that's factual is that the Secretary and the President came to a agreed viewpoint that was not difficult, if you will, for them to arrive at on where the department should be and how it made sense within the overall budget. So that's first thing. Second thing is, how do we take cuts? Obviously, the shift in our approach overall in terms of op tempo and use of forces around the world is central to how we can transition more toward looking at challenges like China in the future and improving the toolkit in other parts of the national security sector beyond defense. So we're not always answering first with military capability or military forces. That depressurizes, in particular, as you know, the MILPERS and O&M accounts for us. In making sure also that we're not trying to replace back to quantities one for one, but we're really looking at capability. We are, as you well know, Pat, we are in an era where platforms will always matter, but it's the software, it's the quick turn, it's the munitions, it's those pieces that make such a critical difference in our capability set. And that's a different funding picture, I think I would say. One of the most fascinating things I found is that the only thing people know really about our defense budget is the top line, and everyone's arguing over it. They have no idea what's in the budget. And that tells you everything you need to know about the state of the debate in Washington. The defense budget's too high, the defense budget's too low. It's neither of those things, I think, unless and until you understand what's in it. So when we roll this budget out, I am confident that we will have areas, first of all, of risk that we will be able to identify and talk through. But I'm also confident that we're putting forward a really high quality budget that does the things I talked about in my prepared comments in terms of preparing us for the competition with China.
Thanks. If I may sneak in one more quick question, please, Dr. Hicks. We have some questions in the Q&A box about Myanmar. Could you talk to us about that, please?
I don't know what the question is.
It's just in general, your thoughts on any actions that the United States might take with regard to Myanmar.
I will plead outside my area of responsibility here as the Deputy Secretary, so I'm going to sidestep that.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think now we're ready to turn it over to Anya Manuel, who will introduce. Thank you very much, Dr. Hicks.
Thank you.